All right, Dr. Adaira, welcome to Docs Outside the Box. This is a special episode. How you doing? What's up?
I'm great. Thanks for having me here.
I'm
Super
excited to
excited.
have you here because it seems like we're like of the same spirit animals because you've
We are.
accomplished something. You accomplished something that I think is so dope. People don't talk about. And me and my wife accomplished this about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And I'm gonna let you tell the story. But first, before we jump into what you've accomplished, tell us who you are, where you're at, what you practice, all of that stuff.
Okay. Well, so my name's Adaira Landry, and I'm an emergency medicine physician at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. It's one of the Harvard affiliated hospitals here in Boston. And in this role, I am obviously a clinician, but also an educator and mentor. So I am an advisor to the Harvard Medical School. I'm an assistant residency director for our residency program. And I also work with our diversity and inclusion focused office within our department, doing a lot of work in that area as well. Lastly, I spend some time doing consulting for ultrasound education as well.
Busy. So all of that sounds like you're just busy.
I'm busy, and I have two kids with one on the way.
Are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm about to deliver in like a month.
Are you serious? And you made time for us?
I did. Well, the baby's not here yet.
Either way, I just remember when Renee, the last month, she even forget it, the last 2 months, she was like, yo, I'm not talking to nobody. She was retaining water. She was like, look, whatever I got to do.
I'm so edematous. I know.
Sandals all day.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So it's like a different level of exhaustion being pregnant the third time. But a lot of the reason why I wanted to be here is because I'm actually able to do all these things. I'm convinced because I paid off my loans.
Why you spill the beans like that? I was trying to build up the hype a little bit, but it's all good. We're going to jump right into it. So you paid off your loans, which is super dope. Super dope. So you really feel like a lot of the things that you've been able to do
100%
to this point is because you really you think loans really hang over you that much that it starts to impede on what you want to do in life?
I think for some people who are financially responsible and aware, they feel restricted by this fact that they have this debt that they owe to someone. And so taking risks and jumping from one thing to the next is really scary when you have hundreds of thousands of dollars over you. And so, for me, it was the biggest point of freedom in my career was when I paid off my loans. And so I'm certain that I wouldn't have been able to add on all of these other things if I still had student loans hanging over me. And honestly, it could have also been even like more kids because, my husband was pretty terrified of how much debt we owed and kids are very expensive.
Yeah.
And so a lot of
especially
people,
in Boston.
Exactly. And a lot of my colleagues, when I ask, are you going to have any more kids? A lot of the time, their number one reason why they aren't is because of money.
Yeah.
Because of how expensive it is. And so for me, I feel like we can definitely afford a third. I don't think we'll have a fourth, but we probably could afford a fourth as well. And I just feel like I have a lot more liberty from that perspective.
All right. So I definitely identify with a lot of those things. Definitely your husband feeling that, ooh, I don't know if we can do a third, or I don't know if we can do two if we got all this debt. Like I was thinking about all of that stuff when we realized that we had a ton of debt. And I've told my story before when like the debt really became like a serious, like palpable, like this is a problem type thing. Like I think people are so used to like either signing something electronically or, signing a piece of paper and knowing that, okay, maybe 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, I'll have to be responsible for this, right? But when it comes to that point and you actually have to pay, like part of your monthly budget is putting something towards student loans and you don't know how to handle this, it becomes a problem. So for you and your family, like when did you start to realize, okay, this student loan issue is going to be a problem for us?
Before we became a family, I would say that's when I realized I need to get it together. So I went to UCLA for medical school. So it was an in-state tuition for me. And I took out probably, an extra $5,000 to $10,000 more than I needed to.
You just like me,
a medical student. Well, because I was in LA, I was young and I was like, I want to go out. I don't want to feel like I'm penny pinching. And so, I didn't know anything about student loans at that time.
So you were maxing them out.
Maxing them out. Well, I don't know if it was maxed out, but I definitely took out more than I needed. Okay. And I remember being able to like go shopping with my girlfriend. I was using loan money to like go shopping for clothing and go out for drinks because we were pass fail. Like we were always going
out. Oh, y'all
right?
pass fail?
We were pass fail for the first 2 years.
Okay.
And so, you know, it was LA and we were just always having fun. And then my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, but was in the Bay Area. So we spent a ton of time traveling back and forth to, you know, San Francisco, and those were flights.
Wow.
So it was just like, there was no consciousness when it came to money. Other than that, I had it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't mine, but I didn't care. I mean, it was mine to pay back, but it was like almost like we were just spending money.
Do you remember, or how about this? Do you remember how much loans you had when you graduated from college, or did you have loans?
I didn't have many because I went to Berkeley, and again, I was a state student. And so the tuition at the time wasn't terribly high. And so I think I came out of undergrad with like 30,000 max. Mm-hmm. So that was nothing compared to how much I knew I would have from medical school, which was about 250. So when I left residency, I remember looking at my first like loan payment as a fellow, how much I owed. And it was like the first time I looked at it, like literally. So
you got sent a coupon book, or was it like online?
I think I got sent like something about refinancing.
Okay.
And then I was like, oh, I'm so curious about this. And I looked up my own student loans, and I was like, oh my God, my interest rates were like 6.7%. I think I had one that was 8.5. And then my ones from Berkeley were like 2. So those ones were a lot lower, but the medical school interest rates were so high that I was like, oh my God. And so I found this like student payoff calculator, and I was chugging numbers, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to owe this for so long.
Were you aware of how much you would be making as an attending? Like, did you know like the numbers, or you just knew you'd just be making a lot of money? Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, like, you know, you're going to be making a lot of money, or you actually kind of knew like, I'm going to be making like 300 or 400 or 500,000.
I knew that for, you know, my first 5 years out of, you know, residency, I did 2-year fellowship. So this is like this is like a complicated story, but you know, I knew that coming out of fellowship, my first attending job will be somewhere around 200 to 350, like depending on where I lived. You know, I didn't know exactly where I was going to be, and if it was a community site or hyper academic. So I knew that I would probably be maxing out at like 350 with bonus and stuff. So I knew I wasn't going to be making like the same amount of money as perhaps, you know, interventional cardiologists or those sorts of folks. So I had some understanding of it, but I will just rewind a second. I think I became a little bit more financially mature in residency when someone gave me like this book that was targeted towards physicians and financial literacy. And it was a really quick read. I read it over like a weekend, and I picked up a few tips from that, which was to start my 403B in residency. Which I did. Smart. Yeah. I did during intern orientation. Like literally we went to our intern orientation, and it was like, if you want to enroll in this.
So someone gave you the book early on then?
It was like, I probably like in between med school and residency. I read it.
That person hooked you up. Mm-hmm. They hooked you up. That was a big gift.
That was. And then the other thing I did was, I changed my bank account from like a brick and mortar bank account to an online banking system. Okay. And so that had a much higher savings rate, which wasn't like, I wasn't saving like so much money because I didn't have a lot of money in there. But that was like, those are like 2 things that I realized earlier on that I wasn't doing before that I could have been doing, for instance. And so I probably started there. And I would say that's where I stopped. I wish I had like really dove deep into the chapters on like all of the different payment systems that you can have, because I didn't. And by the time that I started to think about payment, I was a first year fellow, and you know, those 4 years of residency, by the way, I did a 4-year residency, like none of that counted because I wasn't making any payments at all. So I was like, that means it's going to be starting if I did like PSLF,
Adaira,
that's going to be starting from, you know, my first year as a fellow for 10 years. I was like, this is not a program. And then I was really nervous about the reliability of a government, you know, driven program and it sort of backing out as policies change and things like that. So I was like, I feel like the only thing that I could do is just like escape this immediate terror and just pay them off.
So you're married at this point when you're like, I need to pay this off.
I had just gotten married. I got married at the tail, like May 24th of my residency, like 4th year.
Is your husband in medicine at all, or?
No. He at the time was an electrical engineer, so a scientist making very, like, they don't make much money. Now he is, a CEO of a tech company. He started a startup. And so that
they need a podcast host.
And so that, like, him taking that leap, he also felt a sense of freedom because we were out of debt.
Okay.
And so, like, those are all the things that come when you feel like you're not tied to a particular job. Like, he didn't feel like he needed that sense of stability that I think he would have had if I owed $250,000 or something still to the government or whoever, like, for student loans. I think he felt like he could just quit his job and start a company because, like, we're young and we are financially free in many ways.
So, the reason I was smiling when you said you opened up the 403B, because that's actually my biggest financial mistake, is not opening up an account, an IRA or a 403B in residency. Because I think even if you make mistakes, at least you're making those mistakes. You're learning what it's like to budget, or even not have to worry about it. It's like automatically going into that account. You're learning how to pick funds, right? And then also the most important thing is just that compound interest that's going on. So I missed out on all of that stuff. And I look back and I'm like, I can't believe I just missed literally technically 6 years, because I did a fellowship also of nothing, not putting any money anywhere, which was painful, yo.
I don't feel that pain because I did it, but I would feel that pain if I did. Wait, the other thing I did do was a Roth. I started my Roth, I think my second year of fellowship, or excuse me, of residency. So I started residency in July. And so I think I was able to get that first year because I did it before like April 15th or something, but a Roth IRA. Through Vanguard. And so I've been doing that since, I guess, my first year of residency. And we do that. We don't miss that at all. Like,
wow.
Ever. Mm-hmm.
So you did a 403B through your school, and then you did your own Roth IRA for your own personal account. So for the students who are listening, the residents who are listening, a Roth IRA is you're taking post-tax money. So whatever money that's in your paycheck, you're taking that account and then you're investing it on your own, not associated with a school. She was investing it in Vanguard, and at the time probably the total amount was like, or the 5, max like 5,000 at that point, but now it's like 6,000 something. right and the reason why people like Roth IRAs is you've already paid taxes on your money already. Right, so by the time it grows and you're ready to take it out in your 60s, you don't have to pay taxes when it's time to take it out. So that's why a lot of people like Roth IRAs, but it only works when you're at a certain pay level. So
it is a little bit confusing because I have my 403B still at, with Prudential. That's where it was at the time when I was a resident. And then I have my Roths, and my backdoor Roth is now through Vanguard. And then also through my current job, we have Fidelity. So it is a lot to manage. I haven't converted it all, but those are probably the minimum things that I feel like everyone should consider before they start thinking about loan. Actually, that's like a debate, right? Should you pay off loans or do retirement?
We're going to get into that. Yeah. Well, first of all, I think what's really dope is that you're saying you're saying the right places. Like you're saying Vanguard, you're saying Fidelity. I mean, I tell my story. I just finished talking to the Black Men in Medicine group at Harvard. And I told my story about personal finance through how I learned, which was the School of Hard Knocks. And I talked about all the mistakes that I made. And one of the biggest mistakes was just aimlessly following someone who, quote unquote, was my financial advisor, really wasn't a financial advisor, was an insurance agent, acting like a financial advisor, made mistakes from buying really expensive, Franklin Templeton funds that were, really front loaded with high expense ratios. We can get into that in the audience, but basically she's doing the right thing from the get go. So, well, let me ask you this question then. So let's get into knowing that the student loan issue is a problem, because there's a difference between knowing that student loans is a problem and then saying, okay, listen, we're going to do something about it. Let's take the first steps. Take us through that gap, right? Because there's a different, how did you get that gap? How did you start going from, there's a problem to taking action?
I think I I think a lot of it was my husband was really nervous about bringing in kids and having debt. Okay. So I always say I always say that he has, you know, in a positive, very productive way, brainwashed me to be afraid of debt. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, he comes from a very different background. His mother was an accountant, like a high up accountant for Macy's. His parents are incredibly financially savvy. Mm-hmm. And my family, I love my parents, but like the finances were maybe a weaker spot for them. And I just never learned the idea of being like super, you know, adverse to debt and paying things off slowly and just letting it linger. And so I think he was a huge driving force for me to really start taking action. And so, like I said, I did all these different calculators online, using all these calculators online and trying to figure out what's the best approach to, you know, I could do the PSLF. And I think I remember calculating like I would probably have saved like $70,000 or so or maybe a little bit more than that. I can't remember if I had gone that route, but it would have taken 10 years. And I have to work for a particular type of company. And I have to work a certain amount of hours. So there were some restrictions there. And I like I said, I knew I wanted to do a lot with my career. So for me, it was looking at all the other options. I felt like probably the best thing.
And this is like your first year as an attending now, or
my first year as a fellow. I started paying my loans off as a fellow.
Why are you doing all the right things? Wow. Hey. All right.
I think so I started fellowship in July, and I think I started looking into my first payments like system probably that fall, and my first payment was made out in November. And I remember being like, oh my God, this is going to take me so long. Mm-hmm. And I think once you start paying it off, it becomes actually quite addicting. I was like, I felt like I was so hyper focused on my student loans. And
were you making minimum payments, or were you making more than minimum?
No. You can't pay off the amount that I owed minimum payments in a few years. You have to go in overdrive. But it was like a blitz.
But as a fellow, you don't get paid that much more than as a resident.
No, I think I was making, oh gosh,
probably like 70 maybe.
Yeah, around 70 to 80 as like my base salary. But okay. I wasn't working too many shifts.
Okay.
And so I was moonlighting like crazy. And there's some strategy here with moonlighting, because you can moonlight internally, but the salary, the hourly rate was lower than if I went to a different site. And so I was doing moonlighting down the street at a smaller facility, but it was like single coverage and a little bit higher volume, but they paid much more per hour. And so I did my moonlighting there.
So rather than get paid, I'm using regular numbers. So rather than get paid $10 an hour and working all these extra shifts, you can work maybe just a little bit less time, but get paid like $50 an hour. And I'm just over exaggerating, but you're being more efficient with being paid.
Yeah. I mean, it actually ended up being like let me think. It was probably like a $60, $70 per hour difference.
That's a big deal.
That's a big deal if you start tallying that up. And a couple of things about like picking a site for moonlighting was that I really wanted a place that was close, because if you start traveling for work, that in many ways dilutes the amount of hours or the amount you're getting paid per hour.
Yeah.
Because there was a site that someone was saying that was almost like $125 or $100 more per hour than if I had done it in my own institution, but I would have had to commute an hour each way. And so at that point, it's not worth it. Because I'm basically, you know, a 10-hour shift is really a 12-hour shift. Because I always count that entire start to finish part in my shift. And so for me, it's a little bit less.
It takes me like 5 hours to document. I just be here.
Exactly. And that was an important thing too, because I picked a site that was known for charting to be easy to be done on your shift.
Okay.
And so a lot of the docs at this place that I ended up picking, people were like able to finish their shifts without having charts to do at home. That was really important to me.
Can you go into that more? Like talk to people about because this is also, we're educating the students and the residents so they know what it's like as an ER doc. Like so they think you're finished at 7, but you're not. Like tell us about that.
So you have to be really vigilant about your off time, because you're not getting paid for charting off hours. You're not also getting paid for your commute. So I walk to one of my sites. Like I can walk to work and I'm there in 8 minutes. And then the other hospital I work at is like 15-minute drive, if that. And so that to me was a big factor. Like I don't want to have to commute to work. The other thing I don't want to do is have to spend time off of my shift doing charting. Like that just sort of prolongs the shift. So a lot of times in emergency medicine, and I think probably internal medicine and a lot of outpatient settings, your charting is happening after your day is over. And so that essentially is diluting your salary, because to me, time is money, right? And the biggest way to waste money is by using time that's unfunded. And so
real talk.
Right.
Come on.
And so I try to, finish my notes on shift. Now, by the way, I am not like a top biller. I'm always in the middle of the bell curve. And I'm fine with that, because to me, if I'm finishing on time, like I'm almost making more money than if I'm staying late charting for a few extra RVUs, for instance. And so my salary personally isn't largely driven by RVUs, but I know some places are. So this might not be applicable to everyone, but for me, we're not like the majority of my salary doesn't come from how I chart. Some of it does.
So RVUs basically means that like if you do like a chest tube, you'll get like a certain percentage off of that in a grander scheme, like that's done at the end of the year and stuff. So
right. And
I see what you're saying.
And so for some, like it's a part of my bonus, but it's not a huge part of my bonus. Mm-hmm. And so I know for some folks, it can be a huge part of your bonus. So if that's the case, this might not be relevant to you, but for me, I do the charting so that I'm communicating what happened to the patient, not necessarily as much as like, I'm going to squeeze out every single dollar from this visit. And some folks want to do that, but then they stay late with charting or they chart at home. I don't want to chart at home. I have 2 kids at home. I have a husband at home. So when I'm at home, I like to be like home.
I feel you.
Right.
I got you. All right.
So I try to be, I'm okay in the middle of the bell curve. Like I don't have to be the best charter. I don't want to be the worst, but I'm okay in the middle.
Okay. So when you decided you're going to pay off your loans starting, first year of fellowship, you started doing locums. Did you know in your mind how long you were going to take to pay off your loans?
I think I wanted to do it. So, within like 3 years, that was my goal, is to try to, and I think I got around a little bit under 3 years. And I knew, because I wanted to have a child, and I was like, when daycare comes around, daycare in Boston is very expensive. Mm. And so I was like, that's going to end up taking a few $1,000s a month, which it did. We ended up choosing a very like expensive daycare initially. And obviously,
is that the type that they're gonna get into like a prestigious college because they went to this one school? That type?
It was pretty fancy. I'll be quite honest.
You could say.
We have since downgraded. We have since realized there's not much.
You slumming it? Come on now.
With 2 kids, you're like, it's not sustainable.
Yeah, I get it.
So we I was like, if I'm gonna put them in this, I was the first time parents. I was like, they need the best. So I put them in this, like my first daughter. I was like, I'm gonna want her to have everything great. And so I ended up just calculating, okay, I have 280,000. We ended up using some of our money from our wedding to like, just as like a big bolus. So that was like $30,000 or something like that we put into our student loan.
You're doing like all the right things.
I think a lot of it was, I'm very grateful to have a husband who's he's not very money driven, or he doesn't care about money, but he has some insight because of what his parents have taught him.
But most people, they know, like, I'm not going, for me, like, I didn't, like, my residency, I was ducking calls, like, it was a bill collector, like, we need our money. Don't call me, buy, click, right. And even in fellowship, like, what? Buy, click, and then even like my first couple of years as an attending, I was like, yeah, it really didn't start hitting me until like I started seeing like, not missed payment, but just like the interest just carry over.
That was the main thing for me.
And I was like, interest. Yo.
Yeah. The interest is so terrifying in the beginning. And you have to not get discouraged, because even as I was making these massive payments per month, I felt like, oh my gosh, the interest is so much money. But it actually ends up becoming in its own self an incentive, because as you pay more on the principal, your interest decreases over the time. So I remember by the time I was done with paying my student loans, like that last interest payment, I think I actually just checked the numbers today. It was like 30 something bucks or something like that. I just had like one little small payment left over, and it was a little tiny blip as far as the interest rate compared to the first few payments.
That interest, let me tell you real quick, a short story of me. Like, so me and my wife both went to the same med school, and we both got our MBAs. We graduated with 240 of debt. And then she did her residency for 4 years, OB. I did my residency for 5, and then add on an additional year for fellowship. And like I said, like I either was like, what do I got to do to defer? Oh, I can't defer anymore. What do I got to do what's the next? Forbear? Right. Yeah. Just let me do the click. Right. Because that's stupidly, that's what I would do. So by the time we got married, which was for me a year and a half after I finished fellowship, my loans had gone from $240,000
I don't even want to know.
to $330,000. Adaira, yo. I was like, yo.
So, like, that's a crazy thing.
It was depressing.
It was, yeah, it's crazy. I also, this is a controversial topic, I know, but I felt, I'm a huge fan of the PSLF program, but I also feel like,
tell us what that is. The people who listen, tell them what's the PSLF.
The physician student loan forgiveness. I actually don't know what the P stands for. Physician, right? Yeah,
something like that. Whatever.
It's a government funded program where if you work for a 503c for 10 years and you have a certain number of hours per week that you work, I think you make 120 qualifying payments, then you can have your student loans forgiven tax free. Like you don't have to pay income tax from that amount of money that was forgiven. And so a part of me feels conflicted on it because I think the amount of student loans that we have in our community is incredible, but we also have a lot of people who make a lot of money. And so, I felt a little bit conflicted on whether or not I would want to take from those who have student loans, like my younger brother, for instance, where his income is nowhere near mine. And I'd rather him get that money than me, for instance. And so for me, I felt like I was in a good enough situation where I knew I could handle it. And I felt very privileged. And it was a huge sense of relief, but also pride for me once I paid it off, that like I did this myself. And, it's not all to cast judgment on those. I have a lot of amazing friends who've had their student loans forgiven and they're physicians. It's just a personal choice for me. Like I felt like, for me, this felt like the right thing.
So I the reasons we didn't do it is we just didn't want to be in debt that long.
Yeah. I mean, that was also, there was,
and we didn't know, we didn't know who would be the next government, the next administration. What if they said, we're 8 years into it and they're like, yeah, we're getting rid of it. We didn't know any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, is I just working for a nonprofit hospital was great, but what if I wanted to change, or what if I wanted to move? It just felt like I didn't know what would happen. It was just so you felt locked in for 10 years.
Yeah.
And I felt like, well, if I can make the payments for 10 years, that's fine. And I can do the things but the being at one hospital, I'm not sure. What if I want to move, or what if something happens and stuff? So we just decided to pay it off. So you decided to pay it off. Okay. So you initially thought, how long initially? 5 years or 3 years?
3 years. And again, I think for what you just said, I would agree. My number 1 and 2 reasons were that I wanted to pay it off. And I was really, really doubtful of the program. That was probably the biggest reason why I didn't go that route. So I wanted to do it in 3 years. I figured I was a first year fellow. It was a 2-year fellowship. I was also getting a master's at the time. And I was working, I think
Are you serious?
Yeah.
What were you getting a master's in?
Education.
Through your fellowship?
It was a combined program. So you would get a fellowship and then a master's. And so because of that, the master's was paid for, by the way. It was like deducted from your fellowship salary. So instead of making 120 or whatever, I made 70.
Got you.
And so
that's not bad.
Yeah. I mean, so you didn't have loans. And I was working, I think the expected amount of shifts per month were 5 or 6 shifts a month for that salary. So it wasn't a huge load of shifts coming out of a residency program where we're working 18 shifts a month, right? And so, or 17, 18, I felt like I had so much more capacity to work. And so I found a moonlighting gig and I was just working a ton of shifts, a ton.
Okay. So that's how you were able to make really large lump sum payments.
And I was a hyper saver. So we lived in an apartment that was where, you might have lived in as a medical student.
Let's get into how deep you had to do things. So let's talk about that lifestyle. So what was it like?
It was we still live almost like residents, to be quite honest. But we were living like medical students in the beginning. So
ramen noodles?
It wasn't, we definitely eat a lot of noodles in our house, but we, we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that was old and nothing had been renovated for decades, but it was very cheap rent. And then my husband had a full salary. He was, a scientist, but it was a full salary. And so we just said, let's just live off of your salary. And so it was almost like,
was his salary smaller than yours or bigger than yours?
It was about this. It was bigger than mine, but it was much smaller than what a physician makes.
Got you. Okay.
And so we pretty much lived off of him, and we didn't require much expenses, by the way. So just so you know, for the last, I don't know how many years now, 10 years or so, I was wearing the same pair of Danskos. When I bought these Danskos in med school, I was like, these are so expensive.
I bet you your soles were like leaning to the side. They
were so crazy, but they were so broken in and comfortable. Okay. But I was like, I'm going to get a new pair of Danskos when my student loans are paid off.
Okay.
That's
all
like
right.
That, because they're like $150, right? And I was like, these are so expensive. I remember making that like promise to myself that like, these
so you give yourself a carrot.
Yeah, these shoes are going to push me through this entire process. And so I made that promise, I think, as like a resident. But and so anyway, I remember like that's kind of the life, that's like the mentality. I bring that up because that's the mentality we had, which was like bare minimum. And we still travel like once a year or so, or maybe twice a year, but not much. And it was not extravagant. And
what other things did you do? Like,
yeah.
So tell us the grimy, because like this is what people need to know, right? So tell us.
It's actually like the small things really add up. For instance, like walking versus taking Uber Pool versus taking Uber X or something like the XL or whatever. Like those small things really add up. Or buying everything literally on sale or clearance. That like I wouldn't buy anything full price, and I barely bought stuff to begin with. His parents like to give money for like birthdays or whatever. Like that money went straight to student loans. Bringing lunch to work instead of buying lunch. A lot of attendings I worked with would like after their shifts go out and like treat everyone for like dinner or drinks and those sorts of things. Like I was not doing that. I was like, I'm so sorry. Yeah. I have a mission. Yeah. And I was like, this is my mission. And I'm happy.
So you would tell people about it.
Oh, I think most people who know me know that this was, because it was like, it's really hard to, like, people are like, why are you so cheap?
Right.
But
right.
And so it was just that I really had this incredibly ambitious goal and I really wanted to achieve it. Yeah. And I felt like with each payment, I felt this huge sense of like satisfaction that I'm able to accomplish something that was a huge psychological burden and a huge stressor for me at the outset and at the onset. And I was like, I know that I will be so relieved when I'm able to achieve this goal. So it was almost just like forgetting about distractions, just like any other goal in life. You're studying for the step 3 exam. You're like, I can't go out because I have to study for this exam. For me, it was like, I can't do all this extravagant spending because I have this like very tight budget. And I know once it's done, like I will feel free and then I can do all these other things without guilt.
So in terms of relationship dynamics, whose debt was it? Like, did y'all look at it as that's your debt, or was it like our debt? And be honest. So
I think it was a combo depending on the conversation
or how much it was.
I would say it was like
when it was like $10,000. Yo, listen, honey, our debt. Like, wait, where was you when we?
I think also depends on like when we were in our relationship, where we were, because I definitely before marriage, he was really worried about how much I had, and he had no debt. He was a PhD student. His parents paid his college like in real time, and so he has never had debt. But for me, that was the opposite, and I treated it like it was my burden, though. In some ways, like I didn't ask him to ask his parents for money. I didn't ask any of those sorts of things. It was my debt, and so, but I would say in the regard of how we lived like it was our debt because I lived off of his income, and he was never ever complaining of that.
Gotcha.
And so I think it just depended on the conversation we were having. For me, it was like, I have to pay this off. I hate having student loans. Not like I hate that we have student loans. It was never like that.
You ever found yourself being like compulsive about it, like obsessive about it?
No, I don't know. I bet to someone who's listening to this, they might say this is crazy. But to me, it was just like how someone else might be hyper driven for a particular goal. Like for me, I was, and I would pick up shifts. That's the thing, is that like it does require you to physically exert yourself if you're working for the money.
Trading
Like
time for
me,
dollars. Yeah.
But it's really easy to do this when you don't have kids.
Yeah.
Like I could never look at someone who has 3 kids and be like, you just need to work more. Like that would
Mm-hmm.
never be, that would be insensitive. But for me, I didn't have any kids, and my husband was so busy because he was working really hard and as long as I didn't work shifts that were like overnights and weekends, like he was totally fine with it. Like if I was working a business hour shift and he's at work anyway, like then it worked out perfectly. So what I did was, so this is how it works. When I was a fellow, most of us, because we're fellows, we were getting scheduled for like 5 to 2 a.m. or 3 to midnight shifts. And so I had, many of my weekend or my weekdays were free. So I would like stack my classes and my shifts on like those 2 days a week. And then the other 3 days of the business week, I would try to moonlight at this particular place. And I would try to keep it so that we weren't missing each other too much. So I would take like a nine to whatever 5 or type shift. 10 to, I think they had a 10 to 8. So it wasn't so bad because I could see them in the morning, we come home, have dinner, or those sorts of things. And I would take a lot of those shifts. And to me, it was just like extending residency for a bit, but I was getting paid and I was paying off my loan. So it was worth it.
Now, did you guys, so while you were living off of, when you guys were living off of his salary, did you guys budget at all? Or was it just, were you doing mental math, or were you guys like a hardcore, this is our budget, everything else is going straight to student loans?
We don't live like extravagant lifestyles even now. Like we're pretty low key.
Gotcha.
So we still do all the minimums. Like right now we still do I do my 403B. He does his 401k. We do our Roth. And then now we've done our 529, which is our, for our kids' college fund. And then I would say, so aside from that, like the rest of it just really just stays in like savings and or like, stocks, depending on like the market, that we'll invest in. And so we don't we don't own a boat. We don't travel to Paris. I don't have like fancy clothes or those sorts of things. Like we pretty much save a good chunk of our salaries.
Now, what about
except for daycare?
What about when daycare is no joke? What about the whole notion of when you were a fellow and then as an early attending, you're paying off this debt? Did you save at all? Did you invest at all during that same time?
We did. We did. I think so. Saving was tough as a fellow. Our savings account was pretty flat. I would say we hovered around the same. I can't remember how much it was at the time, but our savings wasn't budging. We just pretty much had an emergency fund, and then we would have enough money for like, obviously the things I mentioned earlier, like the 403B, the Roth. We always prioritize that, which is something that maybe we can discuss, which is like retirement versus student loans. Because to me, it was a matter of like, I wanted to really make sure that my retirement was taken care of first before student loans, because of all the growth that you will get for those like extra few years can be a big difference later. And so once I figured out that, okay, I was able to save for retirement and I had refinanced my loans down to, so they were about 6.5, I think it was like 6.7 or something, like 6.7 and like 8.5%. I forget where they exactly were, but they were pretty high interest. So I refinanced them first. And then,
this is during fellowship. Okay, got you.
And I got them down to, I remember when I was like doing the paperwork, they're like, oh, you can refinance down to 2%. But by the time I got through all the paperwork, it was still like 3.75%. It was
still better than 8%.
Yeah. But I mean, it was a little bit like, I don't know how that worked out, but it wasn't as low as they told me it was going to be. But I was able to do it so it was like automatic deduction, so you got a little bit extra off per month for the interest. And to me, like that, some people might look at that and say that's a pretty low interest rate. You should just invest. And so if you put it in the stock market, you're going to get a much higher return over time. But for me, like I said, the financial freedom.
People don't go ahead. I hear what you're saying. I know what you're about to say. Go ahead.
Well, the financial freedom was like well worth it for me. Like the day I paid off my loans, I was like, oh my God, this is the most amazing feeling in the world. And excuse me, I'm in part of all these Facebook groups and listen to blogs and podcasts and things like that. And I'm not necessarily pushing for FIRE, which is financial independence, retirement early. because I don't want to necessarily stop working. I just want to be able to control how much I work, when I work, and how I work. And so we're pretty far off from financial independence. But I do feel like that we would be able to get there and retire, earlier than, let's say, like 60s, because it's really, like, medicine's really tough, and emergency medicine's
stressful.
tough.
So
I couldn't imagine working. I know there are people who are working full time, but I couldn't imagine working full time from now until 30 years from now and not burning out. And so I think you have to protect yourselves, and there are different ways you can do that. Like, some people protect themselves by having a side gig, like consulting, or they sell some sort of product, and that's fine. But for me, before I even got there, I was like, I need to take care of the debt.
Yeah, I definitely feel you on. So I think there's that emotional concept, of like just being debt free that nobody really talks about. And for me, like, I get it, like, so when me and my wife were going through medical school, it was during the time when you took out your student loans, there was an opportunity to refinance your student loans, or consolidate, excuse me, at 2%, 3%. So the majority of our loans were at 2%, 3%. And then we had private loans, which is what we used to get our MBAs. Those joints were anywhere between like 8%, 9%, maybe even up to 13%. But that was close to like $180,000. It's a lot of money. And, we went through that process. Well, we could get better results if we put it in the stock market, but we were just like, actually, no, like, they're just certain things that you just can't quantify. Right. So for us, we wanted to be able to tell people no if they wanted us to do extra shifts, or if there was something that was a major change in the hospital, or something that, we wanted to do. Like, we're really passionate about, doing work overseas or what have you. And, it's like, it's not casting shade on anybody, but it was just for us, like, the ability for us to say no to things, or the ability, like you said, to work when you want to work, for me, was way more valuable than saying, I'm going to play this, arbitrage game and then invest and then still have all this ton of student loan debt. So I feel you on that one. I definitely got you. For us, it's just like you said, like, just having that monkey off your back, you can't quantify that, And
it's actually interesting because the monkey is sort of there before, like this cloud hangs over people even before they start the process. I do a lot of mentorship. I love mentoring. I love helping folks. And I get a lot of people who are like, I'm really nervous to become a doctor because of all the money it's going to cost and all the time it's going to take to spend paying it off. And, that's a big point of discouragement for folks. And so I love being a proof of concept to them as I mentor, saying, look, I have the same amount of money in debt that you're going to have. And I paid mine off. I think I was like 33, maybe almost 34, when I was completely debt free. And you can do it too. It takes a lot of dedication, or you don't have to do my path. You can do this student loan forgiveness if that's what you want to do. Yeah. But I think it's called public student loan forgiveness. Is that what it's called?
I think so. But somebody will let us know. So it's all good.
Someone will let us know. It just came to me for a second. But like, you could do that program, if you if that's what makes sense for you.
I think that's a really good point. Like you said, you end up being, I like that. Like, you end up being a proof of concept, because I know a lot of students, whether they're in high school or college, they get turned off by the amount of debt. And I know definitely there are, even to this day, even on Twitter right now, like, you can hear from students who are saying, like, I didn't know the consequences of what would happen, with this debt. And to see you up there as a model, I think is really amazing. It's really awesome. So, well, let me ask this one question. Did you ever at one point crack when you were paying off your debt? Like, yo, why am I doing this? Or I just want to buy some red bottom shoes, or you had to have cracked at one point.
By crack, do you mean like did I mentally crack, or did I crack as in I cheated and I bought something?
Whichever one that you can look back and be like, yeah, that was funny.
I'm trying to think. I think there was okay, yes, here's what happened. I remember wanting to go shopping, and my husband, I swear, he's the most supportive person on the planet, but he made this comment once when we were shopping that I was like, oh, this is 50% off, and he was like, oh, it's better than 50% off, 100% off, and we're not buying it. And we were laughing. It was a funny moment, but I never was able to forget that line, even though he was saying it as a joke, and he wouldn't have cared if I bought it. But for like years, I could never get off this
Free
Um,
99.
free 99 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my God, the only thing cheaper than 50% is 100% off. Like that I think got to me. I remember one time I really wanted to buy something and I was like, I'm just gonna do it. And I did it and I felt really guilty that I spent it was actually clothing for my daughter from this like very bougie clothing store.
Adaira,
I
oh
know.
no.
And like it was like newborn clothing that she was only gonna wear for like a day because you know how kids
Yeah.
grow. I was like, I'm just gonna buy it because it's so cute. And I just remember feeling so guilty when I got home because I totally had cheated. And I did not return it. But that was probably one moment where I felt like,
Yo, but the amount of money you saved yourself in paying interest, you could splurge
yeah,
doing that, right? Like, come on now,
yeah, I
right?
definitely splurged.
Yo, you ever put the numbers in a calculator? Like we put the numbers in a calculator and we did, well, if we followed the student loan payoff schedule that Navient had for us, in light of all of our interest, like the amount of interest that we would have paid would have been like close to like
I
$300,000
know.
above what our
Yes.
principal was.
I mean, definitely if you want to get rid of your loans, I think just paying them off, you know, to me, it doesn't make sense unless the interest rate is super low, like under 2%, to pay them off in that fashion. Because of how much extra money you're going to pay, plus the psychological burden of owing money. To me, that part doesn't make sense. But so to me, there's like a couple options where it's like you pay them off really quickly and just do it. Like you refinance and you do it, or you do the public service loan forgiveness. That's what it's called. Or you do something like that, or the repay or the pay. Like you do something that's like there's an advantage to how you're configuring your
A
payments
strategy.
so that but to me, just like rolling the dice and paying $3,000 a month for the next 30 years, like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so, having a strategy is definitely high yield. And I favor for those who are able to do it, just the early payoff because, with such high burnout rates in medicine, and especially this is like data, like women leave medicine, they not necessarily altogether, but they cut back on their hours and for various reasons. And so, being able to do that under my own control and when I wanted to do that and not feeling guilty about taking some time off and cutting back on my hours for being a mother, like I was able to do all that. I'm able to do that now. And I don't feel guilty at all.
Yeah. As a guy, definitely there are stressors that you all as women go through that we can't,
Right.
understand at all, but it's like it's real stressors and it's unfair, not to mention trying to have a child, but then you think about the amount of income that you lose, right, for your own type of retirement, right? You're losing the ability to put money into your own retirement during that time. And then also from a professional standpoint, it's not fair at all. So definitely as a watching my wife go through that and kind of balance and trying to say, well, I can't get away from medicine because, I want to keep my license. And also the ability of being able to just bring in something, is important to her. But, it's something that I can't get, but I support her fully in this. But tell me, what was it like when you made that last payment? Like, did you do like the Running Man? Did you do the Roger Rabbit? What'd you do, yo?
I think we actually went out to a very, very nice dinner that day.
Y'all splurged then.
We splurged. See, but that's the thing. Like you suffer for like a few years, and like now it's like if we want to do something, like we, like for our anniversary, we went to this like incredibly expensive hotel that we would never have done. Never. If I feel like if we still were paying off loans, and so like to me, it's being able to do that is nice. So I think we went to a really nice dinner that night. I can't remember exactly what, but it was just like a great sense of freedom. We were super happy. It was like the best.
Well, this is dope. So what are some parting words you'd like to say to the people listening about your journey, about where you are in your career, even just maybe like the ability to do all these different things and juggle all these different things without the stress of knowing that, you got this huge payment you got to make. Tell us about all those different things.
I would say remove the blindfold. Like if you are hiding from your loans, you just got to face them. I know a lot of people who are like, I'm going to deal with my loans later. And that is not necessarily the best strategy.
Okay.
And so I would say, it is intimidating in the beginning, but once you have figured out a plan, it becomes less intimidating. And it's actually a nice ambition to like go towards something knowing that you will accomplish it. But for folks who are listening, who are like, I'm going to deal with my loans in 5, 10, 15 years, like me did,
Yeah.
where that interest rate will catch you and you
Yeah.
end up paying even more money. I did the same thing too. So I should be honest about
No,
that.
you didn't. No, you didn't. You got it in fellowship. What are you talking about?
No, I mean, I wasn't paying in residency. There are people who pay in residency.
Were you ducking phone calls also in residency, or?
I don't remember getting phone calls, but I definitely was like, every single letter that came in the mail was going in the trash. Every single letter. I didn't even, it was like, I think I had Sally Mae and Navient and they were like just in the trash. I didn't even open them. So yeah, like don't take out more than you need.
Oh man.
Please do some research. You know, there's a ton of amazing books out there and podcasts and free resources as well, online, blog form, and like learn about all these things early. Like there's some things you can do now. Like you can do the Roth IRA, you can do the 403B now. If you have kids, you can do the 529. Like there's all sorts of things that you can do. You don't have to do it all right now. At one point, it took us years to sort of add these things in, but just being aware of a plan and creating a plan, I think is a great first step.
Well, listen, Dr. Adaira, thank you for getting real personal with us. Cause I think this journey is, you know, from a number standpoint, that's all numbers, that's pure number crunching and stuff, but personal finance is personal, you know what I'm saying? And
it's so personal,
you know, and like, there are just different motivations, whether it's, you know, mathematical or if it's, you know, personal in nature that drive us to do certain things. And, you know, your story really is inspirational. And I definitely, I jive with your story a lot because I a lot of things, that's why I said we start off like as soulmates, like we understand each other a little bit, you know, but this was super dope. Thank you so much for sharing this story with the audience.
No, this is awesome. Thanks for having me. And hopefully people, you know, learn something.
Oh, they absolutely will.
And they're not intimidated. It's not as intimidating as it sounds.
I think that's the key thing is like hearing from you. It just sounds like you were just kind of able to look at it, know where all your loans are. Cause that's what I tell other people too, is like, look, the first thing you got to do is just know where your loans are.
Right.
Right. Because you think your loans are with one company, but they may be on several other companies, you know, and it's like, yo, it's okay to make a payment. Like, it's okay to make a payment. Like you just stop the cycle of this interest just accruing. So yeah.
Yep.
Well, Dr. Adaira, thank you so much for coming on the show. Maybe we'll bring you back because we sometimes get questions about student loans. So if I get some more questions, I'll have you back on if you come on.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your time.